According to mythology, the phoenix was a bird of golden and scarlet feathers, as large as an eagle, outliving generations of men and associated with the worship of the sun. Legend stated that when the phoenix reached the end of its life cycle, flame consumed the creature, and from the ashes it emerged anew, reborn, only to capture some of the ash and carry it to Heliopolis, the city of the sun, and leave it at the altar of the sun god Ra. The legend of the phoenix has been passed down throughout history, and although each culture has their own depiction of the immortal firebird, one theme remains constant throughout. There is only one phoenix, and everything else is ash. Hey internet friends, welcome to reality, where fiction is said to be too fantastic. Everyday life is boring and mundane. Nothing happens for what seems like decades, and then, rather suddenly, a decade's worth of events happens in a week, likely becoming the next plot for a novel ghostwritten by Steve Pechennik and ultimately branded as fiction. Weeks like this past one, particularly as it relates to France, that's what I want to discuss today. Providing a little context by connecting the past to the present, showcasing a sequence of events that led up to the main one, and pointing out a few coincidences along the way, of which I will leave all of my sources pinned as the top comment. Let's begin. Christianized by the Romans, Paris became the economic and religious hub of Europe during the Middle Ages. Much like how the Catholic Church promised to absolve one's sins and grant forgiveness to those who fought in the Crusades, the houses of God erected by the Church were established in the same fashion as the Church's military dominance. The granting of indulgences was extended to those who aided in the construction of these lavish places of worship. This served not only as cheap labor, but also as a channel into which the creative energy of the collective was poured. Which is why the Notre Dame, which translates to Our Lady or Virgin Mary, is such a magnificent encapsulation of centuries of European culture, creativity, and craftsmanship. Construction began in 1163, and the church was built atop of what was once a pagan temple. Though you could argue that it was one pagan temple on top of another, as many of Christianity's symbols and holidays are pagan in origin, which is a statement of fact that offends many, though offending you is not my goal at all. The Notre Dame Cathedral took centuries to build, and with it, the religious control system reinforced its hold on society through its relationship with monarchies throughout Europe. During the Age of Enlightenment, Paris emerged as the financial capital of continental Europe and the center for education and intellectual pursuits. This period illuminated a great injustice, the ever-growing divide between the three social classes. The first being comprised of the clergy and the Pope, the second being the nobles, both of which were privileged classes with the lion's share of political sway. The third class included everybody else, a highly taxed class of no special privilege. Whether the French Revolution was orchestrated by your usual cast of characters or commandeered along the way, the result was an awakened fervor amongst the masses, attacking symbols of royal authority and protesting the control of the church, leading to the violent destruction of a monarchy in France, meaning that the French Revolution marked a change from feudalism and absolute monarchies, who had ruled over societies for much of recorded history, the enduring tales of which are likened to human farmers essentially farming their respective herds of cattle, to democracy in a colonial era, taking political power away from the Catholic Church. Feel free to debate on if the actual application of democracy in the modern era has been a tool of the system to rule over human cattle in its own respect. I'm not here to do that. My point is that the French Revolution caused the fall of the old world, and the remnants of what emerged from the rubble are still around today. The revolution was said to have ended in chaos, creating a power vacuum that gave rise to Napoleon and other various initiates to rule over France. The Notre Dame managed to survive the plague, famine, revolution, and 2 world wars, and it became one of the most widely recognized symbols of France. Post-World War II France developed their current system of government, declaring itself to be an indivisible, secular, democratic, and social republic, with a resurgence of the middle class. But over the decades, in tandem with globalization, the government has shifted from an emphasis on rebuilding and invigorating France to a government which enforces heavily criticized immigration and neoliberal economic policies. The The flood of foreign peoples is a result of the endless war in the Middle East, and the rise in inequality is linked to the same sort of class division that gave way to the French Revolution. Over the last year, protests have erupted across France with the advent of the Yellow Vest movement, whose original demonstrations were reportedly centered around the cost of fuel and aggressive taxation on transport. The Yellow Vests have extended their demands to involve government transparency and, allegedly, the resignation of French President Macron, a Bilderberg attendee and Rothschild Bank protege. On the evening of Monday, April 15th, the roof of Notre Dame caught fire and burned for 9 hours in what was reported to be a workplace accident, as it was undergoing renovation and restoration. And the fire was definitely not arson, the media declared while the building was still smoldering. For people watching the Notre Dame get ravaged by fire on YouTube was kind enough to fact-check the broadcast with facts about 9/11 and terrorism. I mean, who doesn't love facts about 9/11? Hashtag 9/11 Israel. Luckily, the cathedral was closed to the public at the time and no one was harmed. 4 days earlier, 16 religious statues were removed from the top of the cathedral, so those didn't burn up. And people managed to create a human chain to get a bunch of other relics out, including the Crown of Thorns, while the fire ravaged the building. According to this article published in 2017, the Notre Dame was in dire need of repairs, but the government and the church couldn't decide who was going to pick up the tab. So a fundraiser was established to cover the $114 million bill, which they hope to raise over the next 5 to 10 years. But since the Notre Dame caught fire, some billionaires pledged donations, so I guess now they don't have to worry about covering those costs anymore, which is great. Unfortunately for the Yellow Vest protesters, President Macron was supposed to respond to them in a public address to the nation on the evening of April 15th. But that got postponed because it's not every day that a historic and cultural symbol goes up in a blaze of glory, except when they do, and by they, I mean both the Notre Dame in Paris and one of the holiest sites of Islam that was built 1,300 years ago, located in Jerusalem. The fire started in Solomon's Stables, one area of the historic mosque, and as an insensitive aside, between the name and the setting, we could have us a great plot surrounding the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. For the unassuming Ides of April, the 15th was a pretty hot day, and I don't mean just this past week. President Abraham Lincoln was pronounced dead, the Titanic sank, the Hillsborough disaster occurred, and Boston was bombed on April the 15th. In summary, definitely never leave your house on April the 15th. Just kidding, I'm sure Notre Dame wasn't an orchestrated event. BuzzFeed assured me of this. Jane wouldn't lie to us. She's not like that. She has a very stressful job of debunking any and all alternative narratives that sprout up on the web. And side note, I heard that in the BuzzFeed break room, due to budget cuts, they don't even have Costco bulk snacks. They only stock Sam's Club. So I'm sure she just forgot to mention that 875 of France's 42,258 churches were vandalized in 2018. And in March, another French church was set on fire. Jane explicitly stated that implying the Notre Dame fire was arson was anti-Muslim rhetoric in her article about how disinformation of the fire spread online. But what Jane failed to mention was that the groundwork was laid long ago to unite Europe into one homogenized globalist political entity, blurring the lines of nations, and through the wave of immigrants who, by the way, probably would rather go home. After a few generations of open borders, cultural dilution, and destruction of ethnic groups and nationalism, we've got an easily managed herd of human cattle with no sense of national identity, less resistant to a one-world government. It's trendy nowadays to publicly ridicule those who acknowledge the implementation of this plan, labeling them white supremacists, even though these seeds were sown long ago by a man considered as one of the pioneers of the European Union, whose political endeavors were financed by Rothschilds and Warburgs alike. Regardless of the melanin in your skin, the place you call home, or the god you pray to, we're all pretty much in this together. I'll admit it, I picked on Jane. I didn't have to stand on my tippy toes to reach this fruit. In fact, I had to bend down. No tea, no shade. I don't really have a problem with her as an individual, but rather what she and her profession have come to represent. The issue at large here is that, in the aftermath of an event like Notre Dame, the act of merely asking questions is villainized. Conspiracy theories are only for the mainstream media to propagate. and for the upper echelon to discuss. And in the glorious spirit of wrongthink, over the past week, various examples of predictive programming were highlighted by people who are far more observant than me. For example, the BBC ran an article in March showcasing the work of a man who made a Notre Dame replica out of matchsticks. Matchsticks, not toothpicks. Also referenced in the past week was an animated short film that debuted in 2012, detailing the agendas of the United States political leaders, the repercussions of their actions, and allusions to the Bible and ancient Egypt, all taking place in a post-apocalyptic setting. The pet goat title referring to the book that President George W. Bush was reading to children on September 11th. In one scene near the end, a Jesus-like character is seen floating down a river. As the spire collapses and crumbles in the background, the Crown of Thorns disappears, and reflected in cartoon Jesus' eyes is a ring of fire eerily similar to that of the black hole image, released last week. This short film was produced by a company named Heliofence, sporting that black hole sun imagery in their logo, and one could speculate that their name is a combination of Heliopolis, the Egyptian city of the sun, and Hierophant, which is the ancient Greek equivalent of a pope, but a pope of mystery religions. Now, I don't like breadcrumbs, but I am partial to puns. So we must ask a few burning questions surrounding the sequence of events leading up to the fire. Right, so released last week was this potato image of the black hole, which the band Soundgarden released a better quality version of in 1994 on their album cover, Super Unknown. One of the songs of this album was their hit, Black Hole Sun, and the music video for this track had a disturbing apocalyptic theme depicting the Earth being destroyed by the sun. Anyway, the band's lead singer, who funnily enough lived in Paris and had a restaurant there, was reported to have committed suicide after his final performance with Soundgarden, where he of course performed Black Hole Sun. After the release of these black hole photos, the news cycle has been propagating a petition to name the black hole after Cornell. Where am I going with all this? The black sun and the hexagonal black cube are esoteric symbols associated with Saturn, dubbed the real Lord of the Rings, and was considered by Babylonians as the original sun. The worship of Saturn was the Roman precursor to Christianity, and as others have so eloquently summarized, the cathedral they call Notre Dame was one of the nexus points of public manipulation from the time the Catholic Church planted roots in France. Despite the cathedral's beauty and history, is it still being used to manipulate the public? If you do too much wrongthink and noodle over the aforementioned recent events, paired with the propagation of the phoenix through popular culture, and the metaphor of Western history and culture burning down along with the cathedral only to be rebuilt by the rich, all during Christianity's holiest week, which concludes with Easter, well, you might not arrive at a conclusion, but a pun. The return of the sun during the year of the phoenix, making its presence known amongst the ancestors of those who brought an end to the ways of old. Let me know your thoughts. You know I always look forward to your comments. Thank you so much for watching, subscribing, and supporting my channel on Patreon. Bye!